They called her the Ghost of Helmond. To the doctors at Mercy General, she was just Elijah, the quiet, middle-aged nurse who emptied bedpans and took orders without a word. But when a decorated Marine corporal stood up in the middle of a crowded ER, shaking with rage as a surgeon humiliated her, the silence was deafening. He didn't just defend her. He dropped to his knees. "You have no idea who is standing in front of you," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "This woman isn't just a nurse. She's the reason an entire platoon made it home." And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just shock the hospital, it brought the entire city to a standstill. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General's emergency room hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that Elijah Jenkins knew better than the sound of her own heartbeat. At 45, Elijah moved with an efficiency that made her invisible. She was the grease in the gears of a chaotic machine, changing IV bags, calming terrified children, and cleaning up messes that made younger nurses gag all with a stoic, blank expression. Her hair was pulled back in a practical fraying bun, and her scrubs were clean but faded. There was nothing about her that screamed hero. In fact, most people barely registered her presence. "Nurse, I asked for 50 milligrams of tramadol, not 25. "Are you deaf or just incompetent?" The voice cracked through the air like a whip. Dr. Gregory Pierce, the hospital's newest trauma surgeon, stood over a patient's bed, glaring at Elijah. Pierce was 32, handsome in a way that he was painfully aware of, and possessed an ego that barely fit through the double doors. He was a legacy hire, his father was on the hospital board, and he treated the nursing staff like furniture. Elijah didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the patient's chart. "The patient has a history of opioid sensitivity, doctor. 50 milligrams could depress his respiratory drive given his current BP. I titrated the dose for safety." Pierce's face flushed a deep, angry red. He hated being corrected, especially by Elijah, who never smiled at his jokes and never fawned over his credentials. He snatched the chart from her hands. "I am the surgeon here, Elijah. You are the nurse. Your job is to do what I say when I say it, not to play doctor. Do you understand?" The ER went quiet. Other nurses looked down, pretending to be busy. Patients shifted uncomfortably. "Understood, doctor," Elijah said softly. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She turned to the medication cart to adjust the dosage, her hands steady. In the corner of the waiting area, sitting in a wheelchair that looked too small for his frame, a man was watching. He looked rough, a thick, unkempt beard, a flannel shirt stained with old coffee, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had been waiting for 3 hours for a consult on his leg, a mess of scar tissue and metal rods. This was Corporal Ethan Gator Miller. Most people saw a homeless vet or a drifter. But underneath the flannel Gator was 220 pounds of recon Marine, retired, due to injuries sustained in an ambush that still haunted his nightmares. He watched the surgeon berate the woman. He watched her take it. But what caught Gator's eye wasn't the bullying. It was the way Elijah stood. She didn't cower. She stood at parade rest, her feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind her back when she wasn't working. It was subtle, ingrained muscle memory. And her eyes. When the doctor yelled, she didn't look scared. She looked assessing, like she was calculating the threat level and finding it negligible. "Hey," Gator grunted to a passing orderly. "Who's that nurse?" The orderly rolled his eyes. "That's Elijah. Don't mind Dr. Pierce. He's on a warpath today. Well, she's just Elijah. She's been here forever. Doesn't talk much about herself." Gator narrowed his eyes. He knew that stance. He knew that look. He had seen it in the dust and blood of Afghanistan. He just couldn't place it yet. The shift wore on the tension between Dr. Pierce and Elijah, thickening like smoke. The ER overflowed as a multi-car pile-up on the I-95 sent a wave of trauma cases through the doors. "Trauma 1 incoming," a paramedic shouted, bursting through the bay doors. "Male 30s, massive tension pneumothorax, BP crashing." The gurney slammed into the trauma bay. The patient was gasping, his face turning a terrifying shade of blue. Dr. Pierce was there, instantly, snapping on gloves. "Get me a chest tube kit." "Now," Pierce shouted. "Move, people." Elijah was already there, the tray prepped before he had even finished the sentence. Pierce grabbed the scalpel, his hands shaking slightly. The pressure was high. The patient's stats were plummeting. "I can't get a line," a junior nurse cried out. "Veins have collapsed." "Drill him," Pierce barked. "IO line." But Pierce was struggling. The patient's anatomy was distorted by the swelling. He tried to make the incision for the chest tube, but he hesitated. The angle was wrong. He was panicking. "Doctor, his sats are 60. Elijah said, her voice cutting through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it had a command tone that hit the ear differently. "You're too low. You're going to hit the spleen." "Shut up!" Pierce screamed, sweat dripping down his forehead. "I know what I'm doing." He didn't. He jammed the trocar in, but the hiss of escaping air didn't come. The patient convulsed. "He's coding!" the monitor shrieked. Pierce froze. He stared at the monitor, the flatline tone screaming at him. He had missed the pleural space. The patient was dying right there on the table because of arrogance. Suddenly, Elijah moved. It wasn't the movement of a middle-aged nurse. It was a blur of violence and precision. She stepped into Pierce's space, hip-checking him hard enough to send him stumbling back against the wall. "What do you think you're—" Pierce started. "Quiet," Elijah hissed. It wasn't a request. In one fluid motion, she grabbed a 14-gauge angiocath needle from the tray. She didn't hesitate. She palpated the patient's chest, found the second intercostal space mid-clavicular line, and drove the needle in. Hiss. The sound of trapped air escaping was the sweetest sound in the room. The patient's chest heaved. The monitor began to beep a rhythm again. "Needle decompression successful," Elijah stated, her voice returning to that flat, robotic tone. She turned to the junior nurse. "Set up for a new chest tube insertion. Higher this time. I'll guide you." Pierce stood against the wall, his mouth open. He looked around the room. Every nurse, every orderly, and the few patients who could see in were staring. He had just been physically removed from his own patient by a subordinate, and she had just saved the man he had almost killed. Humiliation, hot and toxic, flooded his veins. He straightened his white coat, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Get out," Pierce whispered, his voice trembling with rage. Elijah looked at him. "Doctor, the patient needs—" "I said, get out!" Pierce screamed, throwing a metal tray onto the floor. It clattered loudly, silencing the entire ER. "You are suspended. You assaulted a superior officer, a superior doctor. You practiced medicine without a license. Get out of my ER before I call security and have you dragged out in cuffs." Elijah didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply nodded, pulled off her bloody gloves and walked out of the trauma bay. Gator, who had been watching from the hallway, felt a jolt of electricity run down his spine. Needle decompression. The way she held the needle. The way she checked the vitals. And that check. That hip check. It was a CQC close-quarters combat move. He had seen that exact move used to clear a fatal funnel in a breach. And then, as Elijah walked past him, head down, Defeated Gator saw it. She reached up to wipe sweat from her neck, and her scrub top shifted slightly. Just below her collarbone, barely visible, was a patch of scar tissue. It looked like a burn shaped vaguely like a star. But it wasn't the scar that stopped Gator's heart. It was the tattoo peeking out from under her watch band on her inner wrist. A small, faded trident wrapped in barbed wire. Gator gripped the wheels of his chair so hard, his knuckles turned white. He knew that symbol. It was unofficial. It belonged to a specific, devastating operation in the Korangal Valley. Operation Red Dawn. "No way," Gator whispered. "It can't be." He spun his wheelchair around, ignoring the pain in his leg. "Hey, Nurse Elijah." She didn't stop. She was walking toward the exit, grabbing her coat. Pierce stormed out of the trauma bay, still riding his adrenaline high. "And don't bother coming back," he yelled after her. "I'll make sure you never work in this state again. You're a liability, a nobody." Gator's vision went red. He pushed himself up. His bad leg screamed in protest, but he locked his knee. He wasn't a cripple right now. He was a Marine. "Hey!" Gator roared. The sound was like a thunderclap. It was a command voice trained on parade decks and battlefields. Everyone froze. Dr. Pierce stopped mid-stride. Gator limped forward, dragging his leg moving into the center of the room. He pointed a trembling finger at Dr. Pierce. "You shut your mouth," Gator growled. Pierce blinked, confused. "Excuse me, this is a hospital, sir. Sit down." "I said, shut it," Gator barked. He turned his gaze to Elijah, who had stopped at the automatic doors. She turned slowly, her eyes wide. She saw him standing there. She saw the recognition in his eyes. And for the first time in 10 years, Elijah looked terrified. "Don't," she mouthed silently. Gator ignored her. He looked back at Pierce. "You called her a nobody. You said she practiced without a license." Gator reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, heavy bronze battered. He held it up. "Do you know what this is, Doctor?" Gator asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "This is a unit coin from the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. The Ghost Battalion." He pointed at Elijah. "I was there, 10 years ago. We were pinned down in a valley you couldn't find on a map. We had 20 wounded. No evac, no air support. Just us and the Taliban. The room was deadly silent. We had a corpsman with us. Or we thought we did. She was attached to a cultural support team, but when the rounds started flying, she didn't hide. She took charge." Gator took a step toward Elijah. "She kept me alive for 6 hours with a sucking chest wound. She ran through mortar fire 3 times to drag my lieutenant to safety. We called her Saint. We never knew her real name, because everything was redacted, classified. Black Ops." Elijah shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "Please," she whispered. Gator looked at Pierce, his eyes burning. "You want to fire her? You want to lecture her on medicine, Doctor? This woman has forgotten more about trauma than you will ever learn. She is a decorated lieutenant commander. She is the reason I am standing here." Pierce scoffed, crossing his arms. "That's ridiculous. She's a nurse. If she was some war hero, why is she scrubbing floors here? She's a liar, and you're delusional." "She's not lying," a new voice boomed from the hospital entrance. Everyone turned. 2 men in dark suits stood there. Behind them was an older man, with silver hair, wearing a suit that cost more than Pierce's car. He leaned on a cane, but his posture was upright. It was Senator Thomas Holloway. But to the military personnel in the room, he was General Holloway, retired. "General," Pierce stammered. The hospital administrator who had just arrived due to the noise turned pale. General Holloway ignored the doctor. He walked straight toward Elijah. He stopped in front of her, his eyes soft. "We've been looking for you for a long time, Commander," Holloway said gently. "You disappeared after the discharge. You didn't even come to the ceremony." Elijah looked down at her shoes. "I didn't do it for the medals, General. I just wanted to forget." "I know," Holloway said. He turned to the room. "But you cannot hide who you are. Not when idiots like this," he gestured vaguely at Pierce, "try to tear you down." Holloway looked at Gator. "Good to see you, Corporal Miller. Stand down. I've got the watch." Gator nodded, collapsing back into his wheelchair, exhausted, but grinning. Holloway turned his cold steel-blue eyes onto Dr. Pierce. "You just fired the recipient of the Navy Cross. Do you have any idea how big of a mistake you just made?" Dr. Pierce's jaw hit the floor. The silence in the ER didn't last long. It was broken by the sharp rhythmic tapping of dress shoes on tile. "What on earth is going on here?" The voice was deeper, smoother, and far more dangerous than Dr. Gregory Pierce's. It belonged to Richard Pierce, the chairman of the hospital board and Gregory's father. He was a man who wore power like a tailored suit, impeccable, expensive, and intimidating. He had been in a board meeting upstairs when the commotion started, and news of his son's public dressing down had traveled fast. Gregory Pierce immediately straightened up, pointing a shaking finger at Elijah. "Dad, Chairman, this nurse assaulted me. She hijacked my patient, performed an unauthorized procedure, and now this vagrant is threatening me." Richard Pierce's eyes swept over the scene. He ignored Gator in his wheelchair. He ignored the stunned staff. His gaze landed on General Holloway. "General," Richard said, his tone icy, "I didn't realize you were in the building. I assume you're not part of this circus." "I am the circus master today, Richard," Holloway replied, his voice calm but hard as granite. "And if you want to save this hospital from a PR nightmare that will end your tenure, I suggest we take this conversation to your office. Now." Richard paused. He looked at Elijah. Really looked at her for the first time. He saw the defiance in her posture, the way she stood next to the general, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. He saw the danger. "My office," Richard snapped. "Gregory, come with me. You too, Ms. Jenkins." "And the corporal comes with us," Elijah said. It was the first time she had spoken in minutes. Her voice was no longer the flat drone of an employee. It was the sharp command of an officer. Richard sneered. "This isn't a homeless shelter, Ms. Jenkins." "He is my witness," Elijah said. "And if he doesn't come, I walk. And if I walk, the general calls CNN." Richard's jaw tightened. "Fine." The chairman's office was a fortress of mahogany and leather overlooking the city skyline. It was designed to make anyone on the other side of the desk feel small. Elijah Jenkins sat in one of the plush chairs, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Gator wheeled himself next to her, still clutching his challenge coin. Gregory Pierce paced behind his father, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. His hands were still trembling. "This is absurd," Gregory spat. "She nearly killed a patient." "She saved a patient you were busy killing." Gator interjected his voice, low and gravelly. "Enough." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. He turned his predator-like gaze to Elijah. "Ms. Jenkins, let's cut the theatrics. My son tells me you physically assaulted him. That is grounds for immediate termination and criminal charges. I don't care if you have a medal from a war 10 years ago. That doesn't give you the right to run my trauma bay." "It wasn't just a medal," Richard, General Holloway said, leaning against the doorframe. "It was the Navy Cross. Do you know how many women have received that since World War II?" "I don't care," Richard retorted. "This is a liability issue. She's a nurse. Her scope of practice is limited. If that patient had died—" "He didn't," Elijah said calmly. "Because I knew the anatomy better than your son does." Gregory flushed. "I am a board-certified surgeon." "You panicked," Elijah said, turning to look at him. Her eyes were cold. "You lost situational awareness. Your hand tremors started when the SATS dropped below 80. You were fixated on the tube placement and ignored the tension physiology. You were going to kill him, Gregory. I stopped you." "How dare you?" Gregory started. "She's right," Gator said. "I saw it. I've seen medics work under mortar fire with steadier hands than you had in a climate-controlled room." Richard stood up, his face darkening. "I am not going to sit here and let a nurse and a cripple insult my son. Miss Jenkins, you are fired, effective immediately, and I will make sure your license is revoked. You will never empty a bedpan in this country again." General Holloway laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Go ahead, Richard," Holloway said. "Fire her. Revoke her license. But before you do, you might want to look at the personnel file I just had the Pentagon unseal and fax over to your secretary." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Pierce, a fax just came through. It's marked top secret, but it's been redacted for civilian viewing. It's from the Department of the Navy." Richard hesitated. He pressed the button. "Bring it in." A terrified secretary scurried in, dropped a thick file on the desk, and fled. Richard opened the file. Gregory leaned over his shoulder. As they read, the silence in the room grew heavier. Subject Jenkins, Elijah A. Rank Lieutenant Commander 04. Designation Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman. SARC. Medical Officer. Attached Units. DevGru. Red Squadron, 24th STS. CIA Special Activities Division. Richard flipped the page. Incident Report, Operation Red Dawn. Location, Korangal Valley, Afghanistan. Summary. While under heavy enemy fire, Lieutenant CMDR Jenkins performed 3 emergency amputations in the field, coordinated close air support after the JTAC was incapacitated, and single-handedly defended a casualty collection point for 6 hours, sustained 3 gunshot wounds, refused medical evacuation until all unstable personnel were extracted. Richard stopped reading. He looked up at Elijah. The woman in the faded scrubs. The woman who made $28 an hour. "You're a doctor," Gregory whispered, staring at the file. "You have a medical degree from Johns Hopkins. You're a trauma surgeon." "I was," Elijah said softly. "I haven't held a scalpel in an OR since I came home." "Why?" Gregory asked, his arrogance replaced by genuine confusion. "Why are you working as a nurse? You could be chief of surgery anywhere in the country." Elijah looked down at her hands, the hands that had saved hundreds and failed to save the ones that mattered most. "Because I don't want the glory, doctor," she said, "and I don't want the God complex. In the field there are no titles. There is just the blood and the dirt and the person next to you. I became a nurse because I wanted to care for people, not preside over them. I wanted to do the work, not chase the tenure." She looked up at Richard. "I didn't assault your son. I saved his career. If that patient had died on the table due to his negligence, the lawsuit would have cost this hospital millions. I stepped in. I did the job. And then I stepped back." Richard Pierce was a businessman. He calculated risks and assets. He looked at the file, then at his son, then at the general. He realized he was holding a live grenade. "If I fire you," Richard said slowly, "the general goes to the press. The story is that the Mercy General fired a war hero for saving a life." "Correct," Holloway said. "And if I keep you?" Richard asked. "Then I go back to work," Elijah said, "as a nurse, and your son learns some humility. And maybe, just maybe, you start treating the veterans who come into your ER with a little more respect." Richard closed the file. He took a deep breath. "Get out of my office," he said to Elijah. "Go back to your shift. We will review the incident." It was a retreat, a temporary one, but a retreat nonetheless. Elijah stood up. She nodded to Holloway, then looked at Gator. "Come on, Marine. Let's get that leg looked at properly." As they left the office, Gregory Pierce slumped into a chair, defeated. But in his eyes a new fire was kindling, not of humility, but of pure, distilled hatred. He had been humiliated in front of his father. He wouldn't forget it. The victory in the chairman's office felt hollow to Elijah. She knew men like the Pierces. They didn't accept defeat. They just regrouped. By the time she wheeled Gator back down to the ER, the atmosphere had shifted. The whispers stopped when she walked by. Nurses who had ignored her for years now stared, their eyes darting to the scar on her neck, imagining the stories behind it. She hated it. She hated the attention. For 5 years she had cultivated invisibility. It was her armor. Now it was stripped away. "You okay, Mom?" Gator asked as she checked the dressing on his leg. "Don't call me Mom," Elijah muttered, applying fresh gauze with practiced ease. "I'm just Elijah." "You're never just Elijah," Gator said. "Not anymore. You saw the phones out there. Half the waiting room recorded what happened." He was right. By the next morning, the video titled "Homeless Vet Exposes Arrogant Surgeon and Reveals Secret Hero Nurse" had 3 million views on YouTube. The comments section was a wildfire. "That surgeon needs to be fired. Who is she? Give her a medal. Mercy General is a joke. Look at how they treat that vet." When Elijah arrived for her shift the next day, there were news vans parked on the sidewalk. Reporters were thrusting microphones at anyone in scrubs. Elijah pulled her hoodie up, kept her head down, and slipped in through the loading dock. But inside, the storm was worse. Dr. Gregory Pierce was nowhere to be seen. He had taken a personal leave. In his place, the hospital was buzzing with lawyers. Elijah was summoned to Human Resources at 10:00 a.m. But it wasn't just the HR director there. Sitting at the table was a man in a sharp grey suit, Arthur Vane, the Pierce family's personal attorney. A fixer. "Ms. Jenkins," Vane began, his voice oily and pleasant. "Please sit." Elijah remained standing. "I have patience, Mr. Vane. Make this quick." Vane smiled. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of a non-disclosure agreement. "The hospital is prepared to offer you a settlement," Vane said. $200,000. In exchange, you will resign immediately, sign this NDA, and issue a public statement saying that the events in the video were a misunderstanding and that Dr. Pierce acted correctly. Elijah looked at the paper. It was a lot of money. Enough to fix her small house, maybe take a vacation she hadn't had in a decade. "And if I refuse," Vane's smile vanished, "then we open an investigation into your time in the service, specifically the incident in Kabul, August 2018. Elijah felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Kabul." "That file is sealed," she whispered. "Nothing is sealed if you know the right people," Vane said softly. We know about the child, Elijah. We know about the collateral damage during the extraction. The official report cleared you, but the optics, a hero nurse, involved in a botched raid where civilians died. The press would eat you alive. The saint of the Korangal Valley would become a baby killer overnight. It was a low blow. It was vile. And it was exactly the kind of leverage Richard Pierce would use. The incident Vane referred to was the nightmare that woke Elijah up screaming 3 nights a week. A high-value target extraction in a dense urban market. An IED had gone off prematurely. Elijah had tried to save a local child caught in the blast while returning fire. She had failed. The child died in her arms while the team extracted. She had blamed herself every day since. "You're monsters," Elijah said, her voice trembling. "We are protecting the hospital's reputation," Vane said coldly. "Sign the paper, Elijah. Take the money. Disappear again. It's what you're good at." Elijah stared at the pen. The weight of her past was crushing her. She could end it now. Walk away. Let Gregory Pierce win. She reached for the pen. Suddenly the door burst open. It wasn't General Halloway this time. It was a young resident looking frantic. "We need help, massive trauma incoming. It's a bus crash, pediatrics, multiple critical injuries. The attending is overwhelmed." Elijah dropped the pen. The word pediatrics cut through the blackmail like a knife. "I'm busy," Vane snapped. "Get out." "They're kids," the resident screamed. "We need every set of hands." Elijah looked at Vane. She looked at the NDA. Then she looked at the resident. The ghost of Helmond didn't negotiate with terrorists, and she didn't negotiate with lawyers when lives were on the line. "Go to hell," Elijah said to Vane. She turned and sprinted out of the office. "If you walk out that door, we release the file," Vane shouted after her. Elijah didn't stop. She ran down the hallway, her mind shifting gears. The emotional turmoil was shoved into a box and locked away. The tactical mind took over. She burst into the ER and stopped dead. It was a war zone. A school bus had flipped on the highway. Screaming children were everywhere. Blood on the floor. Chaos. The attending physician, Dr. Evans, was a good man, but he was drowning. He was trying to intubate a 7-year-old while shouting orders that no one could hear over the noise. "Quiet," Elijah bellowed. The sheer volume of her voice honed on the flight deck of carriers, and the valleys of Afghanistan cut through the panic. The room momentarily stilled. "Dr. Evans, focus on the airway," Elijah commanded, moving into the center of the room. "Nurse Miller triage station. 2 needs pressure dressings now. Orderlies clear the corridors. I want a designated path to radiology. You, and you." She pointed at 3 frozen interns. "Start I-4 lines. Green tags to the waiting room. Yellow tags to bays, 4 through 8. Red tags stay here." "Who put you in charge?" a frantic nurse asked. "I did," Elijah said, grabbing a trauma shears. "Move." For the next 4 hours, Elijah Jenkins was not a nurse. She was an orchestra conductor of life and death. She moved from bed to bed, assessing injuries with terrifying speed. She caught a missed internal bleed on a 10-year-old girl. She reset a compound fracture on a boy, so he wouldn't go into shock. She worked with a mechanical efficiency that was both beautiful and terrifying. In the observation deck above, Richard Pierce watched. He had come down to see why Vane hadn't reported back. He watched the woman he was trying to destroy save his hospital from total collapse. Beside him, Vane was on his phone. "I'm sending the file to the Times now, Mr. Pierce. We'll bury her." Richard looked at the scene below. He saw Elijah holding the hand of a terrified little girl while simultaneously directing a resident on how to suture. He saw the way the staff looked at her, not with fear, but with absolute trust. And for a fleeting second, Richard Pierce felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. But then he remembered his son, his legacy, the narrative. "Do it," Richard said. "Leak the file." Down in the ER, Elijah wiped blood from her forehead. The rush was over. The kids were stabilized. She took a deep breath, leaning against the counter. Gator rolled up to her. He had stayed handing out blankets and water, doing what he could. "You did good, Doc," Gator said softly. Elijah gave him a tired, sad smile. "It's over, Gator. They're going to destroy me. They have the Kabul file." Gator's eyes went wide. He knew about Kabul. Every operator did. It was a tragedy, not a crime. But the media wouldn't know the difference. "They wouldn't," Gator said. "They would," Elijah said. She untied her mask. "I have to go, before the cameras come back." But as she turned to leave, the main doors of the ER slid open. It wasn't the press. It wasn't the police. 4 men walked in. They weren't wearing suits. They were wearing faded jeans, tactical boots, and shirts that were tight around the chest and arms. They moved with a predatory grace, scanning the room. The man in the lead was a giant, standing 6'5", with a thick beard and tattoos running up his neck. He looked around the ER until his eyes landed on Elijah. He stopped. His face broke into a massive grin. "Well, I'll be damned," the giant boomed. "We thought you were dead, Saint." Elijah froze. She knew that voice. It was Master Sergeant Bear Kowalski, her old platoon sergeant, and he hadn't come alone. The reunion in the middle of the chaotic emergency room was a collision of 2 worlds. Bear Kowalski didn't just hug Elijah, he engulfed her. He smelled like tobacco gun oil and old leather, the scent of safety. "We saw the video," Bear rumbled, stepping back but keeping his massive hands on her shoulders. "The one with the Marine. Viper saw it on TikTok of all places. We knew that stance. We knew that glare. We caught the first flight out of Bragg." Behind Bear, the other 3 men stepped forward. There was Viper, a sniper with eyes that seemed to see through walls. Tex, the demolitions expert who was smiling like a kid at Christmas. And Doc Miller, the man who had replaced Elijah when she left the unit. "You look like hell, Saint," Viper said, grinning. "You look like trouble." Elijah shot back, her voice cracking. For the first time all day, the mask slipped completely. She wasn't the nurse, and she wasn't the officer. She was just Elijah, and she was with her brothers. Gator wheeled himself closer. "You guys operate with her?" Bear looked down at the Marine in the wheelchair. He saw the missing leg, the scars. He nodded solemnly. "She operated on us, more times than I can count. You the one who stood up for her." "Yes, sir," Gator said. "Then you're with us," Bear said. "Anyone who covers her 6 covers ours." But the moment of warmth was shattered by the shrill ring of a breaking news alert from the television mounted in the waiting room. "Breaking news. The Angel of Death, Mercy General Nurse, accused of war crimes." The room went silent. Elijah froze. She turned slowly to look at the screen. Her face, taken from the viral video, was plastered next to a grainy black-and-white photo of a destroyed market stall in Kabul. The headline was bold red and damning. The news anchor, a woman with a severe expression, spoke with practiced gravity. "Sources close to the hospital administration have leaked a sealed military file alleging that Elijah Jenkins, the nurse, recently hailed as a hero, was involved in a botched raid in 2018 that resulted in the deaths of 3 civilians, including a child. The report suggests gross negligence and a violation of the rules of engagement. The air left the room. Patients who Elijah had just treated, mothers whose children she had stabilized, elderly men she had comforted, looked at her. The gratitude in their eyes evaporated, replaced by suspicion and horror. "Is that true?" a mother whispered, pulling her child closer to her chest. Did you kill a baby?" Elijah felt like she had been shot. The physical pain of a bullet would have been preferable to this. The Kabul op, the memory she had spent 5 years running from. The dust, the screaming, the failure. It wasn't like that," Elijah stammered, stepping back. "She's a monster," a man shouted from the back of the room. "Get her away from the kids." "No," Gator yelled, spinning his chair around to face the crowd. "That's a lie. You don't know the context." But the mob mentality had set in. Fear travels faster than truth. And Evans, the attending who had relied on her just minutes ago, looked down at his chart, unable to meet her eyes. Elijah looked at Bear. "They did it. Pierce did it." Bear's face hardened into stone. The jovial giant was gone. In his place was a Tier 1 operator. "Who is Pierce?" "The chairman," Elijah whispered, "and his son." Elijah backed away, her hands trembling. "I have to go. I can't be here." She turned and ran. She pushed through the double doors, sprinted down the hallway, and burst out into the ambulance bay. The cool night air hit her face, but she couldn't breathe. She leaned against the brick wall, sliding down until she hit the pavement, burying her head in her knees. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere shifted from shock to menace. Security guards were moving toward the ER. Bear watched Elijah run. He didn't chase her. He knew she needed a minute. Instead, he turned to his team. "Viper, secure the perimeter. No press gets near her," Bear ordered. "Tex, you're on comms. Find out who leaked that file. I want a name and an IP address." "Already on it," Tex said, tapping furiously on a ruggedized tablet he had pulled from his pack. "It's a digital drop. Source traces back to a law firm. Vane and Associates. Time stamp is 20 minutes ago." Bear looked at Gator. "Where is this chairman?" Gator pointed upward. "Top floor, penthouse office." Bear cracked his knuckles. "Doc, you stay with Elijah. Keep her safe. Gator, you're with me. We're going to have a chat with management." "I can't walk, Sarge," Gator said, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't ask you to walk," Bear said, grabbing the handles of Gator's wheelchair. "I need a witness, and you look like you've got plenty of rage to share." Richard Pierce was celebrating. He stood by the window of his office, watching the news vans multiply below like roaches. He held a glass of scotch, savouring the burn. "It's done," Arthur Vane said, sitting on the leather sofa looking pleased with himself. "Social media is trending with #NurseDeath. The board will have no choice but to terminate her for cause to protect the hospital's image. The lawsuit regarding Gregory will disappear because her credibility is destroyed. It's a clean sweep." Gregory Pierce, who had returned to the office, looked less certain. "But the file, it was classified, Arthur. Isn't that illegal?" Vane waved a hand dismissively. "It was an anonymous drop. It can't be traced back to us. Besides, who is going to investigate the military? They want to forget Kabul just as much as she does." Richard took a sip of scotch. "You see, Gregory, in the real world, truth doesn't matter. Perception matters. We control the perception." Bam! The heavy oak doors of the office didn't open. They exploded inward. The lock mechanism shattered, sending splinters of wood flying across the room. Richard jumped, spilling his drink. Vane scrambled off the sofa. In the doorway stood a giant of a man with a beard like a Viking, pushing a wheelchair containing a furious Marine. Flanking them were two other men who looked like they ate barbed wire for breakfast. "Security!" Richard screamed, reaching for his desk phone. "Don't bother," Viper said, leaning against the broken door frame. "Your security is taking a nap. We used our indoor voices." Bear rolled Gator into the center of the room. The air in the office suddenly felt very small and very thin. "Who are you?" Vane demanded, trying to muster his legal authority. "This is private property. I'll have you arrested for breaking and entering." Bear ignored him. He walked straight up to Richard Pierce. Bear towered over the chairman. He leaned in close, so close Richard could see the individual grey hairs in his beard. "You have exactly 10 seconds to tell me why you decided to ruin a good woman's life," Bear whispered. It was a terrifying sound. I don't know what you're talking about," Richard stammered, backing up until he hit his desk. "She is a liability. She killed a child. She tried to save a child," Gator roared from his chair. "That child was rigged with a suicide vest. Elijah took the blast shield and covered the kid with her own body to try and cut the wires. The vest detonated. She took shrapnel for a kid who was already dead, you son of a bitch." The room went silent. Gregory Pierce looked at Gator, then at his father. "Is that true?" "It doesn't matter," Vane interjected. "The report says civilian casualties. That's all the public needs to know." Bear turned his gaze to Vane. "You're the lawyer." "I am," Vane said, straightening his tie. "And I know the law. You can't touch me." "I'm not going to touch you," Bear said. "But he is." Bear pointed to the door. General Holloway walked in, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him were 4 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with NCIS and FBI. Richard Pierce's face went the color of curdled milk. "What is this?" Richard whispered. "This," General Holloway said, holding up a plastic bag containing a USB drive, "is the result of a trace on a leak of top-secret, sensitive, compartmented information. You see, Mr. Vane, when you downloaded that file from the secure server, using the access code I foolishly gave the hospital for verification purposes, only you left a digital footprint." Holloway stepped closer. "And when you emailed it to the New York Times, you committed treason. Leaking classified troop movements and operational data, even from 5 years ago, puts active assets at risk. That file contained the names of local interpreters who are still in country. You just signed their death warrants." Vane dropped into the chair, his arrogance draining away like water. I didn't know. I just wanted the summary page." "Ignorance of the law is no excuse," one of the FBI agents said, stepping forward with handcuffs. "Arthur Vane, you are under arrest for violation of the Espionage Act." Richard Pierce tried to distance himself. "I didn't send it. It was him. He's my lawyer, acting on his own." "We have your text messages, Richard," Holloway said coldly. "Leak it. Bury her." Sent at 4:15 p.m. The second FBI agent moved toward Richard. "Richard Pierce, you are under arrest for conspiracy to distribute classified intelligence and obstruction of justice." As the cuffs clicked onto Richard's wrists, Gregory Pierce stood frozen in the corner. He looked at his father, the man who had always fixed everything being dragged away like a common criminal. "Gregory," Holloway said. Gregory jumped. "You're not under arrest," Holloway said. "Yet. But the medical board is going to receive a full report on your conduct in the trauma bay, including the witness statements from your own nursing staff, who have been very eager to talk to my team in the last hour." Gregory slumped against the wall, his career effectively over. Bear turned to Gator. "Ready to go?" "Where?" Gator asked. "To the press conference," Bear said. "They made a mess. We're going to clean it up." Down in the hospital lobby, the scene was bedlam. Reporters were shouting, cameras were flashing. Elijah was nowhere to be seen, likely still hiding in the ambulance bay. The hospital spokesperson, a terrified woman named Linda, was trying to hold the podium. "Please, we are investigating the claims." "Move!" a voice boomed. Bear Kowalski stepped onto the small stage. He didn't look like a hospital administrator. He looked like a mountain. The room went quiet. Behind him, General Holloway Gator and the rest of the squad lined up. "My name is Master Sergeant Leo Kowalski," Bear said into the cluster of microphones. "I was the ground commander for the operation in Kabul that you are all running headlines about." The cameras zoomed in. "Elijah Jenkins, Lieutenant Commander Jenkins, is being called a murderer today. I am here to tell you what actually happened." Bear paused, looking directly into the lens of the main camera. The target was a bomb maker. He used his own children as shields. When we breached, he triggered a vest on his 6-year-old son. Every other person in that room ran for cover. Elijah Jenkins ran toward the boy. A collective gasp went through the room. She tried to disarm it. She shielded him with her body. The blast threw her 20 feet and put full 3 pieces of shrapnel in her neck. She woke up screaming, not because of the pain, but because she couldn't save him. Bear's voice wavered slightly, then hardened. She carried the guilt of that day for 5 years. She quit medicine because she felt she didn't deserve to heal people. But today, I watched her save a dozen children from a bus crash while the man who leaked this file sat in an office drinking scotch. Bear stepped back and General Holloway stepped forward. "The individuals responsible for leaking this out-of-context file have been arrested by federal authorities," Holloway announced. "The narrative ends here. Elijah Jenkins is not a criminal. She is the finest officer I have ever commanded. And Mercy General is lucky to have her emptying their trash cans, let alone saving their patients." The room erupted. Questions were shouted. The narrative had flipped instantly. But Elijah wasn't there to see it. She was sitting on the curb of the ambulance bay, staring at her hands. She heard the door open behind her. She didn't turn around. "Did you fire them?" she asked quietly. "Better," Gator's voice said. "The general arrested them." Elijah turned. Gator was there with Bear and the boys behind him. "It's over, Saint," Bear said gently. "The truth is out. The real truth." Elijah stood up slowly. She looked at her old team. She looked at the hospital that had tried to chew her up. "I don't think I can work here anymore," Elijah said. "Not after this." "Good," Holloway said, stepping out of the shadows. "Because I have a job offer for you." Elijah wiped a tear from her cheek. "I'm done with the military general." "I know," Holloway smiled. "This isn't military, and it isn't nursing." General Holloway didn't offer Elijah a desk job at the Pentagon. He didn't offer her a return to the blackened world of covert ops. He walked her away from the chaos of the ambulance bay, toward his black SUV parked near the exit. Bear Gator and the team followed at a respectful distance. "The board of directors at Mercy General is holding an emergency vote right now," Holloway said, leaning against the car door. "With Richard Pierce in federal custody and the hospital's stock plummeting, they are desperate. They need a new face. Someone the public trusts, someone impeccable." Elijah laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You want me to be a mascot?" Shake hands and kiss babies to make people forget the chairman was a traitor. No, Holloway said sharply. I want you to run the place. Elijah stared at him. I'm a nurse, General. Technically, I'm a fired nurse. You are a trauma surgeon with board certifications in 3 states and a lieutenant commander with command experience, Holloway corrected. I own a significant controlling interest in the healthcare group that manages this hospital. I just activated it. I'm firing the entire executive leadership team. I'm installing a new chief of trauma and emergency medicine. He extended a hand. I want you to take the job, Elijah, but not just to run the ER. I want you to turn this hospital into a flagship for veteran care and trauma integration. I want you to hire guys like Doc Miller and Bear. I want you to build the system you wished you had when you came home. Elijah looked at the hospital. She looked at the windows of the ER where she had been invisible for 5 years. She looked at Gator sitting in his wheelchair, broken by a system that treated him like a nuisance. On one condition, Elijah said. Name it. Gator runs security and patient advocacy, Elijah said, nodding at the Marine. And we establish a pro bono wing for vets. No insurance questions. No waiting lists. Holloway smiled. Done. 6 months later. The automatic doors of Mercy General slid open, but the air inside was different. The sterile, terrified silence that used to pervade the waiting room was gone. It was busy, efficient, and surprisingly calm. At the front desk, a man in a crisp suit stood tall. He walked with a slight limp, aided by a high-tech prosthetic leg that gleamed under the lights. It was Gator. He wasn't homeless anymore. He was the director of patient services. He knew every regular by name, and when he spoke, even the rowdiest drunks quieted down out of respect. In the trauma bay, the chaos of a Friday night was in full swing. Trauma 1 incoming GSW to the abdomen. The doors burst open. The paramedics wheeled in a young man. A doctor stepped forward. He was young, arrogant, fresh out of med school, reminding everyone uncomfortably of Gregory Pierce. All right, listen up, the new resident shouted. I want full labs, a CT scan, and get out of my way. I'm the lead here. He shoved a nurse aside, a young woman who looked terrified. Suddenly, the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dr. Stevens. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. Elijah Jenkins stood at the entrance of the trauma bay. She wasn't wearing the faded blue scrubs of a nurse anymore. She wore a long white coat. Embroidered on the chest was Dr. Elijah Jenkins, Chief of Emergency Medicine. But she didn't look like an administrator. She had her sleeves rolled up, revealing the faded trident tattoo on her wrist. Her hair was still in a practical bun, but her eyes were sharp steel. Dr. Stevens froze. Chief, I was just taking control of the... You pushed Nurse Martinez, Elijah said, walking closer. The entire ER stopped to watch. In my hospital, we do not push the team. The team keeps the patient alive. You are just the mechanic. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Stevens gulped, sweat beading on his forehead. Good, Elijah said. She stepped up to the patient. Now your angle on the entry wound suggests liver involvement. If you rush to CT without stabilizing the pressure he codes in the hallway, check the airway, stabilize, then scan. Right. Yes. On it. Stevens stammered, getting to work with newfound humility. Elijah watched for a moment, then turned to walk away. She passed Bear, who was working as the lead trauma technician. He gave her a subtle nod. She walked out into the hallway and saw Gator. Smooth. Gator grinned. He'll learn, Elijah said, or he'll leave. "Speaking of leaving," Gator said, handing her a tablet. "Check the news." Elijah looked at the screen. A local news report showed a familiar face. It was Gregory Pierce. He looked disheveled older. He was loading boxes into a moving van. The caption read, "Disgraced surgeon loses medical license filed for bankruptcy." Beside that article was another regarding his father, Richard Pierce, former hospital chairman, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Karma hadn't just hit them. It had run them over, backed up, and ran them over again. Elijah handed the tablet back. She didn't feel joy. She just felt closure. "Dr. Jenkins." Elijah turned. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, was standing there, holding her mother's hand. The mother looked tired, worn out. "Yes," Elijah asked, softening her expression. "My mum said you're the lady who saved the bus kids," the girl said shyly. "She said you're a hero." Elijah knelt down so she was eye level with the girl. She thought about the medal in her drawer at home. She thought about the boy in Kabul. She thought about the years of hiding. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart," Elijah said, smiling. "I'm just a nurse who finally remembered she was a doctor." She stood up and looked at her team Gator Bear, the nurses, the staff. They were a family. "Come on," Elijah said to Gator. "We've got work to do." As she walked back into the fray, head held high, Elijah Jenkins was no longer the ghost. She was the commander, and everyone knew exactly who she really was. What a ride. I hope you felt the intensity of that story. It's a powerful reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover or a nurse by her scrubs. Elijah's journey from a silent ghost to the leader of the hospital proves that true strength doesn't need to shout to be heard, but when it does speak, it changes everything. The arrogant doctors and corrupt officials thought they could crush her, but they forgot one thing. You don't pick a fight with a Marine who has nothing left to lose. If you enjoyed this story of justice, redemption, and hard-hitting karma, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good military drama, and subscribe with notifications on, so you never miss the next part. What would you have done if you were in Elijah's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.